Well, welcome everyone back for another episode of A Founder's Journey. My name is Michael Drummond, and I'll be your host today. And I'm so excited. Of course, this is brought to you by the Tech Founder Circle. I'm so excited about my next guest, Jennifer Strout, and she is a four-time entrepreneur, founder, and she's done a sole proprietorship, a brick and mortar, a nonprofit, and now a tech startup. And so, with that, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me today. And maybe if you could just kind of get right into it, let's talk about your backstory. Why entrepreneurship?
Okay. I think like most entrepreneurs, it's like one of those things that you feel from a young age. So, anytime there was a garage sale for my family or something, I would always be like, oh, can I make other things to sell too, like bracelets and stuff like that. Or, obviously the lemonade stand, which in my hometown growing up was actually like a little bit of a tricky one to run because we had, I think, have like a $75 permit to do that. So I was like, oh, we would do it once a summer only. And, we always like followed the rules and got the permit. But, you start to realize, hey, there's a lot going on here. I also, when I was 11, wrote a screenplay and convinced all my friends to be in it. So I had all of their separate lines highlighted so I could film it, and it's this wanting to like see your creations like come to life and like have more of a steering role in it. I think that leads to that drive to be an entrepreneur. So yeah, it's something that just has always been with me. I don't know if there was ever like what was the initial spark.
Mm-hmm. So now tell us, you said the first was the sole proprietorship. What did you do? What was your first thing you did? What was the first real,
So I just got kind of, I think, pushed into that. So when I was in grad school, one of my professors recommended me to tutor because one of his colleagues also had a tutoring company and they were like looking for somebody in a specific niche. So I fulfilled that. And then when I moved on, though, I realized I was like, tutoring was a really good thing I could do to augment whatever else I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so that was the first thing I ended up doing, just tutoring. And then I ended up adding subjects over time. And I did that for a long time, part-time, probably over 10 years, I think maybe like 10 or 12 years.
And then moved on to like a brick and mortar type state. What was that about?
Yeah. So my husband drove that one. But he needed help with the business side. Mm-hmm. And so that company's been around for 5.5 years now. So he pretty much runs it. I stepped away after the second year. We got it set up. We're also very both driven type A people. So we're like best left to our own thing. But yeah, so that's a restoration company, restores antiques and automotives.
Okay. Wow. So you did restoration. So you did tutoring, restoration, and then you went to a nonprofit. And so
yeah. So that one too that one's on hold because of the health of the other founder, but that one was driven by the other founder, and it's basically a connection way for people of different generations, like an intergenerational connection app. And this was spawned from the pandemic and wanted to figure out a solution for trying to make people feel less alone, but also connecting people regardless of, what generation they're in and not, like separating people as opposed to thinking about like what can older people offer younger people and how we can grow from like shared wisdom.
Okay.
And so
it was also tech. It was a tech based though, sounds like.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay. And that was your first experience with that, sounds like. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you got your feet wet with that one a little bit, and then all of a sudden, now jump forward. His health has kind of gone south a little bit, or his or hers, and then now all of a sudden you're looking this new one. Tell us a little more. It's MotivateU, and so tell us what that is, and how you got into that.
Yeah, so I think with all of these, as you've heard the story, it was kind of like I got pushed into each one of them. Like, oh, somebody needs a tutor. Oh, I'm good at this. I'll do it. Oh, I need somebody to do the financial part of my business. Can you get this started for me? And then like the other person, oh, I know you've started businesses. How can we get this going? But none of them were like my core passion. And then finally, like, it was like, okay, you know what, this is with the pandemic, I think really showed me that life is like extremely unpredictable and waiting to do something later is you don't know if that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. it kind of prompted me to want to pick one of the ideas that I have on a long list of ideas to materialize. And I was down between three of them. And this was determined to be the hardest, but also potentially the most lucrative of the three. And I decided not to do it. And I decided to go with the easier, quicker one. And then there was just signs from the universe, like, no, you should do this one, meaning like people were coming into my life that had, a lot of context in the space, or I would, things were getting brought up that I was hearing the pain point with a lot of other people. And so I said, okay, let me dig into this. So when I went to grad school for counseling, I was working in emergency departments. I decided I wanted to go back to med school. And when I went back for my second undergraduate degree in biochemistry to do that, I ended up being a personal trainer and a yoga instructor. So that's a background that relates to this. And then fast forward to having children and trying to get back into the gym as a consumer, it was a train wreck between, childcare, traffic, and all of that for a short class. But then in looking at what my options were, I was like, okay, I have basically what reduces to like 1990s tech, like putting a Tybo video in the VHS to me is the same thing as watching a YouTube video. I'm not getting any feedback. It's great for what it is, but you're not getting that human connection or feedback. And then having young kids, I had no room in my condo for any bulky equipment from some of these AI companies, and nor did I really have the money to buy and kind of commit to those. And so it was like, what are the choices? There was nothing in between. And so that's how I came up with this idea, to be able to allow people to have the same data from the tracking models that are using this bulky equipment currently. Ours is software based though. And then to allow the trainers to be a part of the product instead of going direct to consumer, so that they also, the human component and element is there.
Okay, so it's, I understand then they're still doing it at home, but they're using the app or whatever it is to then have the trainer help them the process of but you don't need equipment, the exercise equipment, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so we use AI to be able to determine if the person's in synchronization with the movement of their trainer in real time.
Okay.
And we use like a traffic light kind of system, meaning green, yellow, or red, to tell the trainer.
We're too far on this. There you go. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, so if you're really off, you get red lined. You actually get a bar at the bottom as the end user, and then the trainer sees like outline around. And then if you have a large class, the trainer can select to just have the red, only the ones that are red pop up, so that they don't have to try to focus on like a sea of tiles and see who's doing what well and who needs help, like who might be, really doing the exercise wrong, maybe like twist a hip or something.
Yeah. I just imagine myself, I was doing yoga this morning from a YouTube thing. I'm thinking that would have been the red the whole time.
Yeah, so we have like different levels. We have easy, medium, and hard. And so you can set it so you're trying to get better in relation to yourself. And you wouldn't put an expert to begin with. Yeah.
Well, that's really good. And then they get the feedback and they can help you. Hey, it looks like you need to move your foot or whatever that is. And
right. So they'll see who needs the help the most. Again, because if you're doing a large class like remotely, it's what we've heard from trainers that they said they're like sitting with their nose up to the screen and just like looking at one tile at a time. My question when I first heard this was, what happens when you get to tile 3? What if tile 1 needs help? Like you can't go back there, And then I said, how do you demonstrate while you're sitting there up to the screen? I don't. Just people have been to the class before, they know the routine. Okay, well that doesn't sound like much of an option at all. And then other trainers I talked to just said, well, I just exercise and hope for the best, but I can't see my clients. I'm just demonstrating and I can't get feedback. So there's this complete disconnect between feedback and no demonstration, or demonstration and no feedback.
Yeah, and I'm kind of off topic a little bit. I'm thinking about like martial arts and stuff, where because sometimes they start doing a lot of martial art training that way. I wonder if you could add that so they can get feedback that way. It's kind of a
we've got a lot of interest from like sports and other movement things like dance and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly, dance, huh? Wow, sorry, I was off topic, but so that's fascinating. So you were you in the process because you were doing? You're still in the middle of a kind of a fundraising, is that right?
We just went public with an equity crowdfunding raise on the 27th of September.
Okay. And how's that? I mean, it's going well for you then? It sounds like you're on the process, and that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to, I think we're around 20-ish% or 25%. I'd have to check of our goal. So.
Okay. Well, great. And then it runs through till December. Is that right?
It runs through to December, or we close it.
Yeah, so. Yeah, whatever if you hit the target, huh?
Yeah. I know we're going to be on a show that airs on CNBC in the fall. So we're kind of like, we may keep it open to capture that as well. So yeah.
So as you've been going through these four different things, what have been the setbacks? I mean, obviously there's been some health situation so what have you learned from some of these things? What's what you've learned from them?
Yeah, I think you have to be creative in your time. So also being a parent, I have two children, a 3 and a 6-year-old. And so going back to the very first company I had, it overlapped with the first one overlapped with the second and the third. And the way I kept it going was just, taking people from different time zones. So working when my first son was asleep and working with people in Asia, and doing things like that. And then when he was having trouble sleeping, if he would not be feeling well, or when he was like in between those stages where kids just regress and can't sleep, I would actually take my calls from the closet that was in the bedroom. And the reason was because then I could hear him about to wake up or just wake up and hush him back to sleep quickly. Whereas if I was in another part of the house and I would come, that time would just then turn into like 30, 45 minutes, putting him back to sleep. So it was like literally doing whatever it takes. And it sounds funny now, like I literally sat on the floor of a walk-in closet and would have these calls, but that's what worked, right? And then when the pandemic hit and we had at the very beginning, trying to juggle all of these 3 companies between me and my husband. And then there was no childcare for a little bit because our nanny had gotten COVID. And then even after that was, do we even let anybody back in the house anyway? In the very beginning, it wasn't clear. So we had no help for about 3 months, and we just worked different shifts. So some weeks he would work, go in late, and I would work in the morning. And then sometimes we would flip it and he would go in during the day and I would work at night. And, for like 3 months, we didn't really see each other very much. But again, it was kind of like what we had to do. So I think you have to be flexible with schedules if you're going to own your own business. And it's not always going to be, like even if your company is open 9 to 5, that doesn't mean you're going to be working 9 to 5. And you might have to see if you can adjust that and kind of roll with it. And know that some months are just going to be not great necessarily from a personal standpoint. You can't, there's this whole idea of like, you can balance everything. And it's honestly not true. It's just sometimes you're going to be like, A+ parent. And then other times you're going to have to kind of, say I'm going to spend a little bit less time with my kids this week because I have to push through, because I was sick last week or something. And so there's this balancing act, but doesn't mean that everything's in perfect balance at all times.
Yeah.
You have to be like, okay with that and know that, as long as you're trying to make up for it at some point. Like I have another friend who's an entrepreneur, and he's like, I took my kids to the pumpkin patch this weekend because I was working, but I'm so happy I finally get to spend time with them. So the week before I was just working like every day, every night, and I was just buying them things to make up for not being there. And it's like, he knew that wasn't what they needed, the things, but it was like what he did to push through. But then then he spent extra time with them on the weekend.
Yeah.
And, it's hard when you're the one doing it. You feel you can like really judge yourself, but your kids see it as like the bigger picture too. If you think about back to your like own childhood memories, you remember like, hey, the highlights. And again, if you're like working towards something, it's that those conversations you have to have with yourself, and you have to be honest if that's what you want to dedicate yourself to. Because once you decide to commit to it, you kind of have to, again, like figure out like maybe you're going to work through the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
So it's been for you. It's been the work-life balance and making that all work kind of with your spouse and your kids and all that, sounds like, and making that. It's what's been as far as like Has there been a massive setback? You're like, oh, wow, that was painful, or like, oh, have you had any of those in the process of any of these?
So I think we've had, so for the brick and mortar, there's been times where you know, when I first stepped back, I think my husband employed, meaning that he hired too many people and didn't really, because had been doing the financial piece, didn't really do projections on that. And so then he had to lay some people off. And then he was able to eventually bring back people on. Now he has more people than he had originally. But I'm a planner. So it's been good learning from him too, because when he first started, I'm like, how could you do, like, it's so risky, it's scary. Like, how could you, like, this seems like with my first business, I could also work a full-time job with it. And I always had it like part-time on the side. So I grew it so slowly to the point where like I stopped doing advertisements 7 years ago and I still get referrals today. But to me, it was like safe because it was on the side. He just went all in with this. And it's very like capital intensive in the beginning business, just keep putting all the money back into it to buy more equipment. And to me, that was very scary. So learning from him too, that I think helped me to take that step, because with like a tech startup, there is a lot more doing than planning. You have to do those projections. You have to know where you're going, but you also have to keep moving and just do things too. And you can plan all you want, but the metrics won't really fall into place until you start implementing things. So that's another balancing act, right? Like the planning versus execution piece.
Makes sense. Yeah. So if you were to give some advice today, what would be the advice you give somebody in your shoes, or who's thinking about, hey, I'm gonna start a business, or I'm a early stage? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think the best thing that you could do is try to get advice from people in this space. So my grandfather passed away like about 8 years ago now. But before I had luckily, when I first joined LinkedIn, connected to some people in his network. And so the very first thing I did when I decided I wanted to start this company was reach out to people that he used to manage at Apple 30 years ago, and really run it by people who are like experts in the space. And then, also doing user interviews. So before I even actually reached out to the tech people, I reached out to the people that would be buying my product. So I talked to anybody I knew who knew somebody who was in the fitness space. So they weren't immediate connections to me. So they wouldn't break my heart or my feelings if they said something negative.
Yeah.
So at least once removed connections. And I just said, like, what are your pain points? Are these also yours? And kind of confirm that, and have continued to gain more of those like we just constantly iterate on those. And when we do demos and things, get that feedback. But so user interviews, and then advice within whatever space you're going to get. And those early conversations you have, trying to say like with the advice could turn into advisor. So two of the people that I reached out to in the first month of starting the company are now on my board. So, like they were like, yeah, this is great. Let's do this. And then it kind of like helps you to know, like, you are going in the right direction.
Yeah.
And also with those first 3 ideas, I don't think if I hadn't played around with them and kind of like talked it through with people, I would have been able to land on the one that was right. I think a lot of times people say, as long as you would buy it yourself, you have a product. And that's not true. The build it, they will come is like a myth, right? Okay, yeah, you'll have something for yourself, but do you want to sell it to somebody other than yourself is the question. And so you don't know what you don't know is another great term or phrase. So you need to talk to your potential users, even if you don't bring up your product at all. Just, is this really a pain point across the board, or is it just one that you feel? And then whatever space you're in, is this like something reasonable to do? Is a market there? But also from like the tech perspective, if you're doing a tech startup, really talking to people in that space and finding out. Sometimes there's companies that are up and coming that you maybe didn't hear about yet until you really dive into it. So all of that before you even spend $1 and, like get your name and everything. A lot of people like buying up URLs, but I think it's a good idea to get that research done in the way first, because you might go through 10 ideas before you land on the right one. Unless you want to sell URLs later in life, you might want to first to get some of that research out of the way.
All right. Good stuff. So maybe the last thing I want to ask, I know you're a reader. You mentioned before how you'd have bookshelves in every room, your house. So tell me, maybe a book that made some difference to you recently. One that you really liked.
Yeah. So The Power of Habit is a book that I read like right before I started the company. And the reason I like that is because I think a lot of people talk about atomic habits, but this book is like Atomic Habits on steroids. So it's a lot more detailed. It has a lot of like case studies and like the research behind how these things work, not just how that, that they work. And so if you're somebody who really likes to get to like in the inner workings and figure out, that's really good. It's also very practical. And there's like a little handbook in the back that kind of goes over, okay, now that you've figured this all out, like here's how to actually like implement it in a very straightforward way. But I think that book is good for anybody who's trying to implement new habits. And I think if you're starting a new company, there are some that you'll have to do. This might seem really silly, but after I had kids, I stopped making the beds because they would come and jump on them. And I was like, why am I making the bed? It's pointless. And one of the habits I reinstalled, like before I started the company, was making my bed every day. Even if they messed up, I'd make it again. And it seems so silly and so simple, but it's one of those, they call it a keystone habit.
Yeah.
And it really just sets the tone for the day. And so, regardless of what changes you're trying to make in your life, I think that's a really good book.
Yeah, well, I love it. Okay, well, thank you so much, and it's been such a pleasure. And if somebody wants to find out more about your business, how do they learn more about MotivateU?
Yeah, so you can go to MotivateU.net. And if you are also potentially wanting to look for a position in the near future, we should be hiring people in the winter time. But you can just can go to the team link, and there's a place to even just put your resume on file if you like to be considered for the future, partnerships, everything. There's a lot of different links on there. So if you go to the main website, you should be able to find what you're looking for.
And crowdfunding, where would they go for that?
So we are in WeFunder, but we also have a link for our website too. So if you had to remember one site, it'd be MotivateU.net.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you again. It was been such a pleasure.
I appreciate it.